San Antonio, Texas. I'm Bill Welge for the Oklahoma Historical Society, and this interview was conducted in Mr. Hill's home on December the 26th, 1987. Mr. Hill, give me your full name and date of birth.
William G. Hill, May the 16th, 1919.
And where were you born?
San Antonio, Texas.
San Antonio. What were your parents' names?
Franklin G. and Mary Hill.
Mary Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What schools did you attend? Did you stay in San Antonio most of your life until you
Stayed in San Antonio through high school and went into the Navy right after high school.
Was it something you particularly wanted to do as far as just joining the Navy? Did you have no job prospects on the horizon?
Not really. No job prospects, and my family was running a dairy, and I was having to milk cows twice a day, and I thought the Navy might be easier than that.
Well, what led your decision to join the Navy over, say, the Army or Air Force?
San Antonio had Army here, and I was familiar with the Army and didn't particularly care for the Army, and the Navy's just sounded more interesting, and I just thought it would be fun to travel.
When did you join the service?
In October of 1936.
1936.
Mm-hmm.
And where were you based at first?
Went through basic training at San Diego, the Naval Station at San Diego, and was immediately assigned to the USS Oklahoma after that.
I see. What kind of an average day did you have in boot camp?
Boot camp was rather simple. I thought I was used to early hours, and working on a dairy and going to school at the same time. I didn't have much trouble with boot camp at all.
I see. So it was more or less the same kind of regimen you were used to.
Yes, sir.
On the dairy farm, were they major suppliers for any of the milk companies in San Antonio?
At that time, we milked the cows, cooled the milk, bottled it, and delivered it to the homes early in the morning.
I see.
Every day.
So you were the early milkman.
Early milkman. We usually finished delivery by 7:30, 8 o'clock, so we could get ready to go to school.
Were you the only boy, or did you have
I had
brother?
an older brother that we worked the milk route together.
I see. Well, how long was your route? I mean, how many homes did you cover?
Oh, it's hard to remember. I would say right now probably 30 to 40 to 50 maybe.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Was it horse-drawn, or did you have a truck?
No, we had a Model T truck at first.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
How many years did you use that?
Oh, I don't remember. I remember in 1932, though, we got one of the first Ford V8 trucks, and that was quite a jump from that Model T to a 32 model V8 Ford.
I see.
Delivery truck.
Well, now your whole operation of the dairy, you're taking over at least about 50 homes. Was that the extent of the operation, or was that considered a small part of it?
No, that was the whole operation, delivering that milk to those 40 or 50 homes.
What was the average price? Was it pint or gallon or?
Well, we delivered from half pints through pints, and quarts. That was as large as we went with our bottles then, and those were glass bottles,
Mm-hmm.
not the cartons that we have now. And they sold, I believe the half pint was a nickel, and the pint was a dime, and the quart probably 20 cents, 18 or 20 cents.
Did you sell cheese as well and
No,
other products?
just grade A fresh milk.
I see.
That was before milk had to be pasteurized.
I see.
It was raw milk.
How did the Depression affect the dairy business?
Well, the dairy business stayed up all right during the Depression, but my father and his brother were partners in this dairy, and they both maintained jobs at the time, trying to get it built up, and it really never did produce very much money, but it kept two boys busy and out of trouble.
I imagine so. Well, did you have other odd jobs, or did dairy keep you?
No, that was all I had. Like I say, I went to, I was running the route in the morning, and then went to school, and when I got out of school, I went right into the Navy.
I see.
Of course, at that time, you had to wait to get into the Navy. They had a waiting
really?
list. Yes,
Oh,
sir.
they did? How
Yes,
long
sir.
did you have to wait?
I think it was 3 or 4 months
Hmm.
on the waiting list.
Because it was peacetime and.
Peacetime, and because of the hard times, the depression and all, there were a lot of young boys wanting to go into the service. It just wasn't much work.
I see. Well, when you finally were assigned to the Oklahoma, do you remember what month and year that you?
No, I really don't. I think our boot training was probably for 3 months, so October, November, December. I probably went aboard to Oklahoma about January of 1937.
1937.
Mm-hmm.
And where was the ship at port at that time?
Its home port then was Long Beach, California,
I see.
or San Pedro, California. Out there it's called San Pedro, California, which that's the main harbor, San Pedro. But the landing boats that took us ashore went to either Long Beach or San Pedro.
I see. What was your first impression about the ship when you got there?
Well, how large it was. That was one thing that impressed me throughout the Navy. A ship like that seemed so large that I didn't see how one could be sunk.
Oh, really?
I just didn't feel like something that large could be damaged enough to be sunk.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing the armor plates on the side and all, I just didn't see that it could be sunk.
Do you have any idea what the measurements were, or
No.
2 football field lengths, or?
No, gosh, I hadn't thought of that. I don't have any idea what the measurements of those battleships were. They were all about the same, but they were narrow enough to go through the Panama Canal.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask you about the Panama Canal, but were you there when the ship lost its anchor at Bremerton? It supposedly lost anchor there at the Bremerton, Washington.
I sure don't remember anything like that. We were in Bremerton one time when I was aboard, once or twice, I believe, but I don't remember anything about an anchor being lost.
I see. Do you recall how many men served on the Oklahoma?
I think during that time it was around 1,100 men, but that was not a full complement. And what a wartime complement was, I really don't know. I think around 1,200, 1,400, 1,500, I believe. I'm not sure.
What was your average day like on the Oklahoma? Beginning with when you wake up call and the whole
Well,
nine
the
yards.
first thing you did when you woke up then in the Navy was get up, and someone had already brought the coffee down to the area where you slept, and you sat around and drank coffee for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then you got dressed, and I was in what we call the deck force. We got dressed and went up topside and started washing the decks down and scrubbing the decks, and we did that, I don't remember for how long, worked up there until chow time, breakfast, and after breakfast you had a short period before you went back to work, and we worked up on topside, and I was in the 4th Division, and we had gunnery men in that division, gunner's mates, and then the deck crew, and I was part of the deck crew, and the gunner's mates went to work taking care of their guns, and we went to work up topside, chipping paint, scraping rust, shining bright work, and holy stone in the deck.
What do you mean by holy stone in the deck?
Those decks were teak decks, and made out of teak wood, and they got some regular bricks someplace. The Navy bought them, I guess, and they broke them in half, and then they walled out a little dent in them, and you took a broom handle and held it in that dent and worked those stones back and forth on that teak deck to clean it. You use salt water, and those, we call them holy stones. Now, where they got that name, I don't know. But rubbing those bricks on that deck would clean oil or anything off of it, or paint. Sometimes you scrape the paint off, but it would clean that teak wood, and with the salt water bleaching it out, it came out just about white.
What was your, now I meant to ask you what your rank was when you entered the service.
Well, I went in, of course, as an apprentice seaman, and after basic training, you automatically went to seaman second class. Everyone did that. And then you took an examination for seaman first class, and then after seaman first class, since I was in the deck force, I ran a small boat to and from the ship to the landings. I was what they call coxswain. That was a third class petty officer.
I see.
And that's what my rank. So second class seaman, and then took an exam for first class, and then coxswain.
What kind of pay did you receive at that time?
When I was discharged as a third class petty officer, or coxswain, I was receiving $60 a month.
$60 a month.
Yeah. When I went in as an apprentice seaman, it was $21 a month. And as a seaman second class, it went up to 36. And as seaman first class, 54, and finally, when I was discharged, it was $60 a month.
So pretty good money back then?
Well, when they furnish everything you really need,
Mm-hmm.
it's all right. You got along all right. Gave you enough to play a little blackjack and go ashore and have some pretty good times.
Well, now you mentioned you went through the Panama Canal.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't go through the Panama Canal.
Oh,
I just
but the
know the
ship-
ship
oh, the
had
ship
been
did.
through it, so I knew
Okay.
it was narrow enough to go through.
Well, you just patrolled the Pacific.
Yeah, we went to Honolulu and up and down the west coast, and we went into Canada one time. I'm not sure when that is. I got some clippings that show when we were up there, but that was right before World War II started.
I see. Well, what kind of, I know during peacetime, what kind of duties did you have to perform as far as when you would go from, say, patrolling the west coast to Honolulu? What were they just on just general operations of preparing you for eventual wartime activity? Or?
Oh yes, we had gunnery training. Even though we were not gunner's mate like myself, as soon as general quarters was sounded, that's when everybody goes to the battle stations. All the deck crews, they all had jobs to perform. I remember mine most of the time was in what they called ammunition magazine. These large bags of powder that were used in firing the 14-inch guns that were aboard had to come up from a magazine by a conveyor, and then you had to roll them into another place where they were pushed on into the gun. It took more than one of those bags of powder for each one of these shells. I don't remember how many, but the gunner's mates were handling the guns and doing all that, but all of the rest of us were handling the ammunition and the powder for those large guns. And of course, all the people that worked down below in the engine rooms, they all had their jobs, and signalmen, everybody had a job during general quarters that they had to go to.
Now, when was your first, after you joined the Oklahoma, when was your first shore leave? And what did you do?
Oh, Gosh, I don't know. We went ashore most of the time in Long Beach, California. And Long Beach, California had area of town, or street, an area called the Pike that had rides, sideshows, just a general carnival like area. And we would go into that and walk up and down, of course, and partake of that. And then, of course, we did quite a bit of drinking in the bars, trying to pick up women and so forth.
You didn't have any outbreaks as far as scuffles with other military?
No, we got along pretty well. We had Marines aboard the Oklahoma, contingent of Marines aboard that manned some anti-aircraft guns and did guard duty primarily when they weren't working on their guns. So although we didn't associate with them too much aboard ship, we got along with Marines pretty well. But that was usually where the fights were, between the sailors and Marines.
Oh, really?
Of course, there wasn't many Army people around those ports, so it was usually the sailors and Marines that would tie into each other.
Well, this is the first I knew that there were Marines on the Oklahoma. I didn't realize. It may have been standard procedure, and I just didn't know it.
I think all of the larger ships had a contingent of Marines aboard. I don't want to take anything from the Marines, but all they seemed to do aboard ship, other than take care of their anti-aircraft guns, which were light, not the larger guns we have now for anti-aircraft, machine guns and like that. They did guard duty. They just stood around in their uniforms waiting for something to happen, like one of them paced by the officer of the day aboard, who was a Navy officer, and he had a Marine alongside of him all the time to go get coffee, do anything that he wanted. He was always a Marine. There was always a Marine doing that. Now they had some drills. They would come up on deck and drill some and do some exercising and things like that, but they didn't have any particular jobs aboard the ship as far as taking care of the ship, just their anti-aircraft guns and the guard duty that they performed. I assume there was a overall plan of where if there was to be a landing, they would be the ones that would be going ashore on the landing.
Well, did they? Was there any particular animosity between the Navy men and
we kind of stayed apart from them. I don't remember any sailors being good friends with Marines.
They just stayed to themselves. And
stayed to themselves. Yes, I can remember them coming up the hatches and coming out of the hatches and doing their things, and we might speak, but usually there wasn't much said between the Marines and sailors.
Did they stay in another part of the ship?
They had their own compartments, yes.
I see. But they were all under the same commander?
Oh, yes. Of course, the top Marine was probably a captain, which would be equivalent to what lieutenant in the Navy. Of course, we had a full captain aboard the ship as commanding officer, full Navy captain.
Who was the commanding officer at the time that you were on the Oklahoma?
I have it over there. Do you want me to
Sure.
get that? Some of that material over here. Well, I should have looked that up before. I was thinking I had it here handy, but I'm sorry. I'd have to look that up. I don't.
Well,
think
that's
I
all
have
right.
it. I believe his name was Horowitz, but I'm not sure about that. No, I'm sorry.
Well, now you were saying, were there other duties that you had to perform besides keeping the decks cleaned and or other related duties that they expected you to perform?
Well, as a second-class seaman and as a seaman first class in the deck force. It was primarily painting and shining bright work, that shining brass, and for instance, there was a large cable that would be used for towing another battleship, if you can imagine a cable that strong. And it was wrapped around the turret as storage for one of the guns, and it was at least 6-inch wire cable. It had to be cleaned and greased, and a piece of canvas sewed around it the whole length, and I don't know how long it was, several hundred feet long, and then that canvas painted so the salt water couldn't get into it and rust it. And of course then occasionally it had to all come off so they could inspect it to make sure that it wasn't rusty, and then the whole thing was repeated. It was sewed back on.
Well, how often did you have to do that?
I don't remember, but there was someone, usually 2 or 3 men would be working on that, and they would work on that seemed like all the time, because by the time they got through, it would be too long, it seemed like, until the time to inspect it again and make sure, because if a drop of water got in there, and that rust would just eat it away, and of course every little steel wire would break then, where the rust was, and it was just a continual thing. Now, that type of thing was going on all the time. There were different things that had to have maintenance on them all the time, and the painting and fighting rust. Of course, fighting rust on the coast is a job all the time, and we didn't have some of the things they have today to fight rust. Like when the ship went into the Navy Yard for, which was every 18 months, I believe, for cleaning the bottom and chipping all the old paint off and repainting it, was done by the whole crew. Everybody turned out for that type of job. And they cleaned it as the water was pumped out, and the boat and the ship set down on dry dock as the water was pumped out, and they had a continuous row of scaffolding all the way around it. Men working as the water went down, they were cleaning. And then that scaffolding was used then to paint it.
How long did it generally take to, with all the men working like that, to repaint the ship?
Well, the big job was cleaning it, and that was done in a matter of a couple of days, because the water was being pumped out, and then after you got the water out and it dried off, then you started the wire brushing and chipping of the rust, and that seemed like went on for maybe a month. And then actually, I said it had to be painted. Actually, when I was in the Navy at that time, they had a system of the application of a hot protective coating of paint, and that was done by civilians.
Oh, really?
With machines, spray machines. So after we got it all clean and ready, then the sailors backed off and the civilians came there and sprayed the whole thing. And then it had to go into the water immediately too, right after that. So I think we were probably in the Navy Yard for a complete bottom scraping and painting, probably 2 months. But most of it was that chipping and wire brushing that whole underside of the ship.
I would imagine you got pretty tired of that.
That was a pretty tiresome thing. You can imagine there's more of a battleship underwater than there is above the water. And so you can imagine the amount of area there is to paint and scrape and get ready
I can
ship.
imagine it would take close to a month to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And you stayed on board the whole time?
Yes.
I
Mm-hmm.
see.
And they usually had other jobs going on. I can remember there was welders all over the ship, and these were civilian workers. from the Navy Yard, doing modifications and repairs and that type of thing.
Now, how long were you on the Oklahoma altogether?
Well, probably from January of 37 to March of 40.
40?
Mhm.
So you maybe had to do the scraping routine maybe twice?
Twice.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
That was more than enough.
Yeah, it certainly was. Of course, probably the last time as a coxswain or third class petty officer, I did a lot of supervisory work then instead of
You didn't
having,
mind.
having to do so much of the other work.
I see. You talked about your, briefly about your sleeping quarters. How large of an area was it? I've been into a battleship, and the sleeping quarters are not very extensive. Can you describe that a little
Well,
bit?
each division had their own quarters. Like I was in what they call the 4th Division. That was a deck division, and I guess maybe there were 6 deck divisions, but each division had their own sleeping quarters. We slept on metal bunks that were hung on posts 3 high. There was the lowest in the middle and one up above, and you had your mattress on there and your blankets and sheets, and every morning you made those bunks up, and they were hanging from on a metal post and a chain down on the outside, and you folded all 3 of those bunks up during the day, and that made the quarters a lot larger. Gave you a lot more room. But when the bunks were down, like when we didn't have to hang them up on Saturday or after inspection on Saturday and all day Sunday, there was maybe 2 or 3 feet in between for walkways. But we ate right there in the same area, and the mess cooks brought the food down, and the tables had folding legs on them. And when a meal was completed and the mess cooks cleaned up, these tables were raised and hung overhead. So then that gave you additional room inside. But when the tables were down and the bunks were down, it was pretty crowded.
How many men slept in the general area that you had quarters?
There must have been 40 or 50 in a division.
Oh, really?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did you have a preference of which bunk you liked?
Well, you got that by rank.
Uh-huh.
Of course you started on the bottom, and really the middle bunk was the most convenient. You could just get into it and out of it like a regular bed, and most of the older men had the middle bunks. Some of them preferred an upper bunk, but the middle bunk was the best, really.
During any time you were out on the sea, did you encounter any rough weather that you can recall that made sleeping miserable? Or
A lot of times in the Pacific, the weather, of course, it's not bad weather upstairs. Topsides, like a storm, it's just the big ground swells in the Pacific are so large, and that's what it takes to affect a battleship. And it was that continuous rolling. Of course, you'd get used to it, but if you're rolling from side to side on your bed, you were going like that all the time you were sleeping, and occasionally some pitching, because I assume, and this was by plan, I assume the bunks were all fore and aft as much as possible, and so any pitching that the ship did, and it's surprising how much a battleship can pitch like a small boat. Any pitching that it did, you didn't feel so much because it was a head to foot thing. But that rolling, you kept rolling back and forth is what bothered most of the people the most. I was.
So if you were an insomniac, you never got much sleep.
No, sure didn't. Of course, sometimes down down in the Pacific where it was so warm, we would go up on the top side and sleep up there just on deck.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you would.
They allowed that?
Yeah. If the weather was nice enough, of course. When you're underway at a good speed on a battleship, even the spray can come over the deck too. So it had to be good weather. Of course, we were on maneuvers a lot during that type of service before the war and all. We did a lot of maneuvering, but the second class, first class seaman down on deck, he doesn't have the least idea what's going on. The ship is moving, and he doesn't know anything about what's going on. Now I realize that they do all the big picture stuff of going in formation or sneaking up on somebody. If you can imagine a battleship sneaking up on somebody. But those maneuvers really didn't affect us, other than we knew we were at sea. And sometimes we would be at sea for 3 or 4 months.
What was the worst storm you ever encountered? Did it last? How long did it last? And did you ever have was there ever a chance that the ship might capsize at any time?
No, I was never in any kind of a storm like that. We were in some pretty bad weather, but not any what I would call hurricanes now, knowing more about hurricanes from our Texas coast. And I don't believe a hurricane would hurt a battleship too much. There was a peculiar thing that happened on our ship one time that the old salts aboard had never seen before. We were coming into San Francisco and moving, I guess, at a moderate speed. And for some reason or other, everything worked properly for the stern of the ship to be down in a trough. At the same time, a wave broke from the stern over the stern, and this was so far in the harbor coming into San Francisco that we were out on deck getting ready to put the gangway out and all the other things that you had to do when you were coming into port. And that wall of water came over the stern of that ship and washed 2 or 3 people overboard and just cleaned the deck of all our equipment and tools that we had out there. It was something that no one had ever seen before on that particular ship. And they were all amazed at it, and no one ever realized or knew exactly why everything worked right for the stern of the ship to be down low enough for a wave to come over. And it was a wave of green water. It wasn't just foamy water. A wave of green water came over the stern of that ship and just wiped the deck clean back there.
The men that were washed overboard, were they rescued?
We picked them up, yes, right away.
Imagine they were kind of startled. You mentioned your meals. What kind of meals were served on board?
Well, of course, that was one of the advantages of being in the Navy. To me, was if you liked the Navy food, you had good food, 3 meals a day, regardless of what was going on. Now, of course, that's not in combat. I realize that. But in peacetime, if you were on maneuvers, the meals were still on time and hot. And, of course, you had to get used to Navy food, like beans for breakfast. That was
beans for breakfast.
Beans for breakfast on Saturday morning. That was just as regular as it could be. The excuse that they told us was because the kitchen would just use one big pot to cook these beans, and they could be cleaning the rest of the kitchen for Saturday morning inspection. And we had Saturday morning inspection every Saturday at sea or in port or no matter what. We had Saturday morning inspection. And that kitchen had to be spotless when the captain walked through.
I see. Well, what other kind of meals besides beans?
Well, beans for breakfast, but we had scrambled eggs. We never did have any over easy or any kind of fried eggs like you would order, because that was one of our favorite meals when we'd go ashore. Order eggs the way we wanted them cooked.
Mm-hmm.
And most of those scrambled eggs were powdered eggs.
Powder.
And the milk usually was powdered milk mixed with water to make the liquid. You know, it's strange. It's hard to remember what we could have had 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, and I can't remember too much about them except Saturday noon meal was cold cuts. No, it wasn't. That was Saturday evening was cold cuts. Sunday was usually some kind of chicken, roast chicken, it seemed like, and we had hot cereals for breakfast some besides the beans, and always had cold cereal, dry cereal if you wanted that, and never any kind of cream to go on that cereal. It was just that powdered milk. And there was this breakfast of chipped beef on toast that you finally got to liking pretty good, and another one that was more like a stew that they put on toast. It was a kind of a brown looking concoction. I won't say the name of that.
But it had a special name.
It had a special name.
Well, I can imagine. What on holidays, did they have any kind of special meal prepared? Or?
On Thanksgiving and Christmas and all, they really went all out with the turkey and dressing and ham and everything, as much as you wanted, and it was really, really good food.
I see.
Excellent food.
Did you have any kind of initiation when you crossed the equator?
Never did cross the equator.
Never did?
No. I was always looking forward to that, but never did do that because there was all kinds of stories about what would happen to you. And all.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't
What kind of stories?
Well, like you say, you asked about initiation. I don't remember now what all the initiations were, but some of them, the way I remember, seemed kind of rough. They really had an initiation ceremony that you knew you had been through something when you went through it.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, you just made a general circuit when you were out on maneuvers from Hawaii. Did you go any further out from Hawaii, or was it just a general circuit, or just?
Yeah, just general area around Hawaii, and then up and down the west coast during the time that I was aboard. That was all we did. Like I say, up as far as we went into Canada one time.
What was the longest extent of out on sea?
I don't remember. Probably 3 months.
3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Was the Oklahoma an oil burner type ship, or?
Yes, oil burner.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
And how often did it have to take on fuel?
Well, as a deck man, that wasn't my concern, and I really don't remember. But we didn't seem to have to refuel too often. I can remember refueling at sea a couple of times, but usually we would be in port, and they would bring these large barges alongside, and the smoking lamp would be out all the time that fuel was being transferred aboard, and that might take 4 or 5 hours of continuous pumping of those large hoses to get us refueled. But the ships were rated, and the ones that did the best would get a large E painted on their smokestack for efficiency, for getting by on the least amount of fuel.
Did the Oklahoma ever rate one?
Yes, we had an E up there several times, and once it seemed to me like we had an E with a couple of hash marks underneath it. In other words, 2 or 3 years in a row, we had won the E for efficiency on fuel.
I see.
And of course, that was you use fuel for heating water even, and they would warn us about wasting hot water and fresh water all the time because they wanted to have this efficiency rating.
Did that become any kind of a burden
So
sometimes?
it wasn't a burden, no. It was just, it would work more or less on the spirit of the corps or something, getting the men to cooperate and working towards that goal that they could be proud of.
And there was a certain amount of pride.
Yes.
So everybody worked together in that.
Yeah, and they did good. I mean, the men really responded to it too.
You mentioned about fresh water. How often did you have to take on fresh water?
Well, there again, I don't know, but I don't remember that being a problem. I mean, when you would come in from a maneuver or something, of course you'd take on fresh water and fuel again and fill up. And the water, I remember less than the fuel because they could come alongside and you take on water without bothering anybody. But the fuel, there would be no smoking whatsoever aboard ship the whole time that was going on. So you were aware of that more than the water.
Towards the latter part of your stay on the Oklahoma, was there any evidence of impending war clouds? Was there any kind of feel towards that?
Yes, there was, and that was when we were up in Canada, and I was looking through this old scrapbook of mine here and the other day and noticed some kind of a headline in some paper that said they were quoting some sailor as saying, if there's going to be a fight, we want to be in on it. That sounded like the sailor, a peacetime sailor, not having any idea what war would really be like, and that was right before. Well, of course, that would be in 40 when the war clouds were really forming.
Now, when did you? Was it that your enlistment was up when you left the Oklahoma, or?
Yes. Well, not quite, but when I went in the Navy in '36, they had what they called then a minority enlistment. If you went in when you were 17, you got out before you were 21, regardless of the time, which meant it would be 3 years plus. And I went in when I was 17. I was 17 in May and went in October. And I got out in March when I should have stayed on until May. But I got out in March because the ship was leaving on a maneuver or something. They wouldn't be back, and they would have to hold me over. So they let me out early, which was March 15th, 1940.
March 15th, 1940?
Mm-hmm.
Had you decided you had enough of military life at that time, and that's why you didn't re-enlist? Or?
Yes, I really did, and I had no idea that what would be going on in the way of war. But before I knew it, I was drafted into the Army for a year of military training when I got out of the service. And had I known we were going to go into war, I would have gone back in the Navy. But I didn't know it, and I thought, well, I'll just do a year of military training, and I'll have it behind me.
Well, had you re-enlisted in the Navy, would there have been a good likelihood you would have been on the Oklahoma again? Or?
I would have tried to get aboard it, and I would imagine they would have permitted it, and I feel sure of it.
Your average day on the Oklahoma, besides the work, I suppose, how many hours of detail did you have to perform?
Well, it was like a normal work day. We'd probably get through with breakfast and be out on deck probably around 8 and work till 11:30 or 12 for an hour, and then go back at 1 and probably be through about 4:30, and then we'd always have to sweep up, make sure the deck was clean and all, and usually quit about 4:30.
What did you do for recreation?
We had a movie aboard ship every night nearly.
Really?
And that was when it wasn't raining, because we didn't have an area large enough other than on top side for a movie, for the seats. And we would put up a portable screen, and the men that wanted to go to the movie would carry a bench up. And two of them carried the bench up, and then whoever their friends would sit with them. And you would sit on these benches and watch the movie. And then when it was over, everybody picked up the bench and took it down below. And I don't remember who the crew was that had to put the screen up and take it down, but they would do that. And 10 minutes afterwards, there was no sign of it. Ever been there. Of course, you could smoke up there, except well, I don't guess there was any time when they had a movie that you couldn't smoke and eat candy, or whatever cookies you had from home. But that was really the only recreation. The rest of the time you were on your own, either playing cards or dominoes or some game, or they had some kind of a library. You could get old books to read. I don't remember doing that very much, but and you sit around and listen to the old sailors tell sea stories too.
Oh, really?
A lot, yeah.
Were those pretty fascinating, or?
Oh yeah, like that. The ones that had served in the Orient were the ones that had the most stories to tell, and we had some men aboard that served 2 or 3 enlistments in the Orient, and they really had the stories to tell from over in that part of the country. Yeah.
Some of those movies, were they I don't want to say first-run movies, but what kind of?
Some of them were first-run movies. Of course, the whole fleet would be in there, and I'm sure these movies had to be traded around and all. Some of them were British film. Of course, having a movie every day, you're bound to get some terrible films, and some of them were not worth watching, really. In fact, a lot of times it'd end up maybe 10 or 15 men would all be watching it, and they'd just be sitting there because they didn't have anything else to do, because the movie was just not any good. But we had first-run movies at the same time, but you couldn't have a first-run movie every night.
So, when you really were tired of any kind of games, I mean, what did they do for the boredom? You just had to put up with it?
Yeah, I don't know how time went by. It's kind of like right now, I'm retired, and I seem to be as busy as I was when I was working 8 hours a day. So I don't know. You just make do some way, and time goes by. Sure does.
What was your most memorable experience on ship?
Gosh, I guess my most memorable experience was running one of these small boats. I ran what was called a 50-foot motor launch. To us now, a 50-foot boat is pretty large, but that was boats that was used to haul supplies back and forth, food supplies, plus men. Every night men would get to go ashore. There were some married men aboard the crew that had wives and children ashore, and they would go ashore every night, and the younger ones that were not married would go to see a movie or get what we called a decent meal or go to a bar or something. And as a coxswain, I was running one of these boats. I had a crew of 4 or 5 people on that boat, and one morning I picked up a boatload of men and officers, and one of the officers was the man that was in charge of all the small boats. I forget what he was called now, but he was a lieutenant commander. and I guess there's 50, 60, maybe 100 small boats in there gathering up the men that go back to all the ships, and you do all this maneuvering in there, and I made a turn and thought I could clear this boat. I ran smack into another boat with my biggest officer that I could have aboard there was aboard that boat, and I was never so embarrassed and so just felt terrible because I knew better, but I thought I could take a chance and get by this boat. And I can remember him just looking up at me, and I felt about 2 inches tall. But really, that was, I believe, just sitting here thinking, one of the worst things that could have happened to me, because I had pride in my ability to run that boat. And to have that happen, if it hadn't have been him aboard, just a bunch of men, it wouldn't have made a bit of difference. Because it really, those are well-built boats, really didn't damage them. They scraped it a little, but we could take care of that. But to have him aboard and the way he looked at me, and when we got back aboard ship, the way he looked at me when he came up to inspect it to see what damage was done, I thought I never would live that day.
He didn't say anything to you?
Never did say anything, really. Really, he was so high up in the chain of command, as far as I was concerned, that he wouldn't talk to me. He might have talked to my division officer. The division officer might have talked to one of the chief petty officer, who might eventually get it down to me, but he wouldn't lower himself to talk to me about something like that.
I have a question here. Were you ever up in the crow's nest of the Oklahoma?
I had to go up there and paint it one time, and that was quite an experience, going up there painting that area up in there, and I just had to do that one time. I forget why that was, and who that normally, whose job that normally was, but I was up there painting one time, and that was quite an experience. You kept a safety belt on all the time in case you slipped or something, but it was still.
I take it you don't do much in the way of painting anymore. You probably had enough of your painting to last you a lifetime.
Yeah. I learned quite a bit about painting in the Navy, and ever since then, I've done a little painting around the house and that type of thing, and felt like I knew how it needed to be done because of my experience in the Navy. Yeah. And I've owned a boat since I've been out of the Navy, and felt like I knew how to run that boat too because of my experience.
I bet.
I wonder if y'all have any of these in your records, the Oklahoma powwow.
No,
You don't?
I don't believe so.
Well, I'd be glad to give you any of these if you have room for them.
Why, we got room.
Because here's when President Roosevelt was going to be in the area, and I really have no use for it now. Not anyone really interested. I have a lot of little things like a smoker program and all. Do you think they
Well,
would?
sure. I think anything that have anything to do with the connected with that would be great, because I don't know what our museum has in the way of artifacts, but we have so very little on the Oklahoma, other than the silver set and some other little things, that this would be just excellent material to add to our collection.
Like, here's a songbook that we had on board.
You'd mentioned when that the Marines did guard duty. Did you ever have to do guard duty at all, or that was strictly?
We had in the deck force, we had what we called an anchor watch that we had to do, and that was all. Now, see, a battleship very seldom ties up. They're usually anchored because they draw so much water. They're usually anchored, so you really have no way of anyone coming aboard other than by boat. so there's not too much guard duty to be performed, really.
I see. The, I mentioned that we have the silver set at the Historical Society. Did you ever have to polish that, or was that strictly the...
No, we had the mostly Filipino uh, mess cooks, or I forget really what they were called. That took care of the officers' mess, and that would been their job to take care of the silver.
And you said, you may have mentioned this, but I want to ask again, during general quarters, what was your responsibilities?
I went into one of these powder magazines
I see.
and handled the powder that would go up to the guns, the 14-inch guns.
The when you left at the end of your enlistment, did you return to San Antonio?
Yes, I came back to San Antonio, and I was in San Antonio when I was drafted into the Army, then about years of military training.
Did you do your training at Fort Sam Houston?
Had basic training at Fort Sam Houston and was assigned to the 3rd Army headquarters here in San Antonio. And from there I went to Officers Candidate School in Fort Knox and got a commission.
What was your commission?
I was commissioned, of course, as a 2nd lieutenant, and then I was wounded in Sicily and was retired from the Army then as a captain
I see.
in 1946.
Now you mentioned that you fought with the 45th Division, or were connected with the 45th
Yes,
Division. Could you relate that
well,
connection?
We were in a separate tank battalion, called a separate tank battalion, because we were not a part of any division or regiment. We were a separate battalion, and we were used by being assigned to infantry divisions such as the 45th. And but when we went into Sicily, we were with the 1st Infantry Division, and that's where I was wounded, and that's where I left the tank. And when they worked with the 45th, I don't know, but I know that some of the time was spent with the 45th in Europe. But I'm not sure when, how much.
Well, now, what engagement in Sicily were you involved with when you received your wound?
I don't know. That was all just one big engagement as far as I was concerned. We landed and started forward, and even being a commissioned officer, I was a 1st lieutenant then. The big picture, I really wasn't aware of. The information getting down to the actual fighting men usually is rather sparse. You don't really know what you're doing, except they would tell us go down this road or go until you meet the enemy and fight him. That was about all we knew, and I was on a road in Sicily when a German 88 sitting up on a hill that we had no idea was there, shot right through the front of my tank and knocked it out, killed one man outright, and the rest of us got out, but I was wounded and was evacuated back then, and never saw any more action after that.
How long did it take for you to recuperate?
Well, that was in July, and I was finally evacuated back to the States and got home in December, I believe.
December what, 43?
That would be 43, yeah. Yes. And, but I never did go back full duty after that. I was on what they call limited service, and like I say, finally retired at latter part of 45, my leave ran until 46.
I see. getting back to the Oklahoma a little bit, when it was hit at Pearl Harbor, did you have any close friends who were on the board at that time?
That's a strange thing. I just couldn't get any information about who was aboard, who was killed, and who was hurt. I wondered. Of course, I know I had a lot of friends because that was just a little over a year that I had been off of it, and I wasn't in contact with any. I didn't write to any of them after I got out, and I wasn't in contact. But being in the service too. And I was just an enlisted man in the Army then. I really didn't have any way of knowing how to get any information. Of course, everything was super secret then too.
Mm-hmm.
Just nobody would tell you anything.
Were you able to find out at any time later?
No, I never did find out except what was read, what I read at different times, and finally, 4 or 5 years ago, I went down to Honolulu on vacation with my wife and daughter, and went over to the memorial they have for Arizona, and it kind of irked me because all this big memorial about the Arizona and listing of the people who were aboard and all, and nothing about the men that went down with Oklahoma, not a thing. And I even asked the man there, and he said, well, if you're looking, you can write to Washington if you're looking for some particular person. Well, I just wanted to see a list of the people that were aboard and which ones were killed and which ones got away and all. And couldn't find that any place down there in Honolulu.
My mother had a friend in her church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, who was on the Oklahoma who died on it.
Is that right?
A Fred Dyer or Beyer or Beer. She
Wasn't
couldn't
Bauer, was it?
It might have been Bauer.
I knew a Bauer, B-A-U-E-R.
Might have been.
I don't know where he was from.
But she said it was from her church, and she couldn't remember, but she remembered that the family, that he had been on the Oklahoma, so I'll have to ask her, but she couldn't remember the name. But, so you went, what kind of a feeling did you have when you went back there? And
like I say, I was disappointed not being able to find out something about the Oklahoma, but it was a real eerie feeling standing there on that memorial over the Arizona, and there's still oil coming up out in the water.
Really?
From that ship, still leaking some of its oil.
After all these years?
After all these years, and standing there and seeing that and knowing how many those men are, the remains are still down there. It's quite a feeling. I don't know how to express it.
That's hard.
That cemetery that they have there on the island, Honolulu, it was an interesting place too, and I'm sure that probably the names of some of the Oklahoma men are there, but there are thousands of names on that thing. And there's no way you can find anyone in particular without just looking.
When you left the service in 1946, you came back to San Antonio. What did you do?
Came back here and got a job with the Veterans Administration. I felt like, having been in the Navy and the Army and wounded, I could do a job with the Veterans Administration. I stayed with them for 27 years and finally retired with both my military service counting towards retirement, both in the Navy and the Army, and then 27 years with them, and I finally retired when I got to be 55. Actually, I was as high as I could go with the VA here in San Antonio. They wanted me to move, and I just didn't want to move, and so I retired when I got to be 55 and had 30-some odd years service altogether, so I could retire.
Did you do anything after your retirement from the administration? Did you take up any other activity?
Well, we had 50 acres of land right out of San Antonio, and I another 50 acres that joined it that wasn't being used, and I used that 100 acres and went into the cattle business on the short, or on the small scale, and that kept me busy up until a couple of years ago.
I see.
I was doing that and raising my own hay and raising these cattle, and then last year I had a heart attack. After I had given that up, and we bought this, built this house and moved into town, and I had a heart attack and then had an open heart surgery last year, so I'm just recuperating from all that.
I see. Well, you look real well.
Well, I'm doing real well, I really am.
When did you marry?
Well, I married my present wife and my second wife. I married when I first went into the Army, or not when I first went in, right after I got my commission, and that marriage lasted about 10 years, and then married my present wife in 1968.
And is the daughter, is this from this second marriage?
That's her daughter.
I see.
Not mine. I have no children.
I see.
Of my own. I've adopted her.
Are you planning to try to go to this reunion of the 45th Division or your military group?
I've been to one of them, and they've had two since I've attended one, and I really kind of plan on going to the one in Oklahoma. Yes. We have a motor home now, and if my health is right, I imagine we will go.
And it's going to be held in Oklahoma City?
Yes.
Be sure to come by the historical building.
Oh, well, I certainly will. I don't know if I doubt if they've even set the dates, but it's usually in the fall, I think. And we certainly will.
Well, I certainly have appreciated your time, and you've given quite a bit of valuable information about the Oklahoma.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry. I guess I could have prepared myself a little more.
Well, I think you've done very well.
But I had no idea what you were going to ask and all, so I wasn't. When you turn that off, I'll go through some more of this stuff and give it to you. In it.